Good evening and welcome to the Pullman City Council meeting for this Tuesday, May 18th. And yes, we're still doing it by Zoom, but the days are getting shorter now. I think the first meeting that we're going to have in June will be able to be back in the council chambers. So we're all looking forward to that. With that, right now, how about D take roll?
Mayor Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Chapman.
Here.
Councilmember McCall.
Here.
Councilmember Parks.
Here.
Councilmember Records.
Here.
Councilmember Sorensen.
Here.
Councilmember Weller.
Present.
Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Under announcements tonight, this Friday, SEL will be hosting a Pfizer vaccine clinic for Whitman County residents ages 12 and above from 3 until 6 p.m. The clinic will be held in the SEL Event Center. While walk-ins are welcome, appointments are preferred, and you can schedule one by visiting the SEL website. Whitman County has moved into phase 3 today. We're very happy about that. The sooner we can have less restrictions, the governor promised that by the end of June, and sooner if we can get everybody up to 70% vaccination rate. But please continue to show your local businesses your support. They would all appreciate it. Tomorrow, May 19th, kicks off the start for Pullman Farmers Market. You can stop by Brailsford Visitor Center on Wednesday from 3:30 to 6:30 for some great local finds. This is EMS Week. Caring for our communities is more than a slogan. It reflects the vital public service provided by emergency medical service workers. And whereas members of the emergency medical services teams are ready to provide life-saving care for those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Therefore, I, the mayor of the city of Pullman, have proclaimed the week of May 16th to the 22nd Emergency Medical Services Week in the city of Pullman. Call upon all our residents to recognize the value and the accomplishments of emergency medical service providers. We're so grateful for them. This is also National Public Works Week. Stronger Together is the theme from May 16th to 22nd. City of Pullman employs 67 full-time, 32 part-time public works personnel. This number includes maintenance and operations, transit, engineering, and protective inspections professionals. During 2020, they put out a news release, and I just thought I'd read a couple of these highlights. Our crews maintained 115.65 miles of water mains, and also about 96 sewer main lines. They've achieved 100% compliance, including no discharge permit violations for the wastewater treatment plants. They tested over 2,014 backflow devices. They processed $7,500 worth of conservation rebate incentives, collected 3,520 water supplies for testing, and they've collected about 67,536 meter reads in the year 2020. When you take a look at all the miles of that all the water pipes and all the sewer mains that our city crews have taken care of, this is a great way to just basically recognize all the great work of our public service professionals in the Public Works Department. They also spent 878 hours sweeping city streets, 6,498 hours updating and maintaining city streets, about 2,313 hours maintaining city water tanks, wells, reservoirs, almost 5,000 hours cleaning just over 385,649 lineal feet of sewer main lines. There's a lot of numbers there. And just again, we want to thank Pullman Transit, Engineering, Protective Inspections, Stormwater Services, and all the maintenance and operations people this National Public Works Week. At this point in our agenda, I have a motion to confirm an appointment. And since I thought I'd just tie it in with Public Works, I am recommending to the council tonight that Sean Colts, a professional engineer with over 19 years of experience in municipal civil engineering, including communications, coordinations with all levels of municipal government and regulatory agencies, be hired as our new Public Works Director, replacing Kevin Gardis, who is retiring after a good number of years as our Public Works Director here. Sean Colts was interviewed by our interview committee, included 2 city council members, Al Sorensen and Nathan Weller. He's had a couple of interviews prior to my appointment. He is a professional engineer, not only in Washington, but Idaho and Montana. And I like this part here too. He has a BS in civil engineering from the University of Idaho and a master's degree in environmental engineering from Washington State University. It's probably the reason why we were able to get Sean to leave Bozeman, Montana, where he's been there as the city engineer since 2015. He's been an interim public works director. He has both private and public work experience. And we're just very grateful that he accepted the position that I offered. At this point, I would entertain a motion to confirm that appointment.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? And I know Sean's watching in Montana tonight. He'll start with us in about the middle of June. So again, very grateful that Sean's just delightful. And for those who are into biking, Sean and his wife, Julian, are very much into biking, and they rode some of our trails. Maybe that was part of the attraction to get him to Pullman. But he also knew Pullman well from his days here in school, here and also in Moscow. So again, grateful for that.
Glenn, if I may, real quick.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say that we continue to be so fortunate with the people that we're getting in here. Shows the real caliber. This guy was a real amazing find. So just wanted to mention that. And great questions, Glenn, during the interview. I think it really vetted it very well. He's a good guy to have on board. So yeah.
And we'll give credit to the public works staff and to Mike Urban, our city administrator. They all came up with a great number of questions, and we had follow-up questions as well. And we had a chance to meet with him in person, and it was really a delightful experience. I'll just tell you that. So looking forward to it. And we'll honor Kevin Gardis as the days get shorter for him. He's done a fantastic job as our public works director. And Sean and Kevin have had good conversations as well. So they've had a chance to talk a lot. Last week, I announced our proclamation that Mental Health Month is taking place right now, essential to everyone's overall health and well-being. And when you start taking a look at, there's a strong research that animal companionship and humor and spirituality, religion, recreation, social connections, and work-life balance can help all Americans. Whereas by driving attention to free and easily accessible resources, we can reinforce that everyone has mental health, and it's time that we all take care of our emotional well-being the same way we tend to do our physical health. And whereas each business, school, government agency, healthcare provider, organization, citizen shares the burden of mental health problems and has responsibility to promote mental wellness and support prevention efforts. Tonight, we invited Mike Burney from Palouse River Counseling to come on and share a few things with us. I know that Mike's been here before, but Mike, we really appreciate your time with us, and every one of us on this console have friends who've had some mental issues. Just the pressure of COVID-19, the isolation, all these kinds of things affect everybody. And I know that you have some tips for us tonight. So, Mike Burney, the microphone's yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council, for inviting me. I know you have lots and lots of things to work on. And so I do appreciate the opportunity just to talk a little bit about behavioral health, mental health, and always when the conversations I have, I want to make sure that I'm answering questions that you may have. I'm happy to try to answer any of those, and I will be happy also to tell you if I don't know the answer and try to get those back to you as well. But as the mayor was speaking about, we've been through, we are in and have been through a very difficult time. A lot of the skills that people have had, that we have had to deal with anxiety, with depression, with things have not worked. There's a lot of our systems, a lot of our things that we depend on, our routines, and things like that have been disrupted for a significant period of time. And so I will talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing, what the impact has been on Pullman, and hopefully some things that we're working on to help address some of those issues. And again, please feel free during any time if you have a particular question, just flag me down. I'll be happy to try to answer that at that time. So maybe some of the I won't say it's bad news, because I think it's just our reality that we have in behavioral health, is that our system, our behavioral health system now, the professional behavioral health system, is at capacity and is overstretched. Through both the private practice, the public WSU systems, they are all concerned about having enough capacity to deal and to help people that are requesting service from us. This is not unique to the pandemic time. It's just been exacerbated by that. And so we see that in lots of different areas. When I talk with primary care kinds of practitioners, and even our person, we're seeing, they're seeing a lot more alcohol and other drug use in addition to mental health or behavioral health kinds of issues. They're much more commingled than it seemed like that they were prior to the pandemic. We're seeing greater acuity in the hospital emergency departments. This is kind of interesting because it's different than what some of the state data has shown. It has shown that for behavioral health visits to the emergency departments, that's actually statewide has kind of gone down just a little bit over the last month or so. What we really see in Pullman and in Whitman County is that some of that acuity seems to be going up. There seems to be more aggressiveness, more challenge to the ED staff, more people identifying that the pandemic has impacted their ability to cope and the kind of overwhelm the resources that they have had in the past. As I talk with the schools, as one might imagine, and again from the statewide survey data, they say that the experience of anxiety, especially anxiety and depression, is inversely proportional to age. So our younger people are experiencing much greater anxiety than older. And I don't think that's probably a surprise to anybody. They have fewer experiences to draw on. They may have fewer skills. They've had greater disruption in their life and in their regular routines. Yes, Councilperson McCall.
Yeah. Could you kind of, I know you're starting in on this, but can you flesh that out a little bit more for us? It's maybe I'm thinking of this because it is Volcano Day. We all sort of went through something way back when. I think I was a senior, maybe, or a fifth-year student at that time. But it's something I'll never forget. So you see where I'm going with this? I mean, how will young people, sort of amalgamate that into their being as they go forward?
I think there is some similarity to the volcano. I mean, our lives were disrupted, but they were disrupted for, relative to the pandemic, for a much shorter period of time. And that's really been what we've seen over the last year and a half, is it's just been the length of the disruption to people's routines. And that's really had an impact on children. And so I think that's the difference between those two. Some of the responses have been the same, but I think we have seen a more acute response because just of the length of time that these things have been disrupted. What we still have to wait to see is how will we rebound from this, and I think that's yet to be seen. We're improving. I mean, as the schools are able to return to kind of more normal things that helps create a routine for the students and for the children. And they're also affected by the fact that their parents or caregivers are being impacted in significant ways. I know when I talk to WSU, they talk about the financial impacts that the families have had on their students, the disruptions in their lives, and just the worry about some of those kinds of things. So I think a lot of that is yet to be discovered in terms of how well we will rebound from this. I know that doesn't speak exactly to your question, but
thank you. It is. It's going to be a very interesting process.
Yeah. Sometimes, other times people are also asking just about the impact of suicide or suicidal ideation. Again, the statewide stats are such that suicidal ideation actually seems to be going down a little bit, most recently, statewide. But suicide attempts are up a little bit the last couple of weeks. And it's a little bit hard for us in Pullman because, we tend to have spikes. And so, relatively, compared to Seattle or King County, the numbers don't average. And so, but we've seen some suicide attempts. And as I talk with the healthcare staff and with the coroner, and so again, we'll have to see whether it's hopefully it's not a trend, it's a spike, and it'll come back down. But we're trying to do a variety of things that will help people address the feeling of hopelessness or helplessness, which tends to kind of drive the someone feeling in a place where they may be thinking about making a choice about whether to live or not. And so again, Whitman County and Pullman is a little bit different in that way, or at least at this moment over the last few weeks, seems to be a little bit different. So again, I started talking about this earlier about kind of our capacity issues. Unfortunately, there's not anything we can do that in the very short term. So some of the things that we're talking about that can be more short, that we can implement more quickly, are some of the community-based things. The people have heard me talk about practice the pause, and there's information about that. We've been really pushing this idea of mental health first aid, or another kind of shorter training process is what they call QPR. So those are things that we can do a little bit more quickly. I will say, because it's kind of exciting, I have been talking with the psychology programs up at WSU, and we're looking at and making a really serious run at seeing if we can become a practicum site for psychology students. That's not something that, as I'm discovering, is not something that happens right away, but I think it's a strength as we as a community that includes Washington State University, might be a way to address some of our capacity issues in the medium term. I will tell you, we are not unique in the fact that we have capacity problems. There are just not enough licensed counselors out there, and so this may be a way that we can address at least a piece of that in the medium term. So those are some of the things that we're doing now. Let me just break for a little bit and see if there are particular questions that people have about behavioral health in general, kind of the impact of COVID. I know the council, deals with lots of different aspects of this. Councilperson Weller, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. As you know, this has been a big topic for me, and I've discussed it with you as well as the council. Unfortunately, we as a city have been doing mental health first aid training. Mm-hmm. The police have done that several years before. But that was a particular goal of mine. I'm glad that we were able to start doing it before the pandemic. Can you kind of speak to what we can do, what more we can do? So, for me, as I look at some of these things, not only have several people from our own high school committed suicide, and I know a few who have from my own class. I had a friend myself who attempted, and luckily he was able to vomit the pills up that he did. And the reason why I'm being a little more graphic about this is because it's so important for us to understand. We're dealing right now, in my opinion, with of course the post-traumatic of what's occurring with pandemic. But I think what people don't really understand is, and I'd like you to speak a little bit more about this, is the chronic, the full life. So people who have been dealing with mental illness their entire life. So I feel it's important to at least, share this, because I am in a place where, in this position, it's important to be able to speak out and let people know that there is hope. I have my entire life dealt with depression, anxiety, and had suicidal ideations. And then, when during my early 20s, they manifested in the way of substance abuse in order to deal with that, self-medicate. So I would like to hear some of the thoughts you have on how we can further help not only the people who are experiencing what's occurring now, the pandemic, but the chronic mental illness that occurs in our community.
I really appreciate that question about that, because we often, and I do this some too, focus on just kind of the people, the kind of newer people that are coming into the service delivery system. And that's, I talk a lot about that because that's a role that we play, and I speak with lots of folks. But I do, I will say to your point, Councilman, that the other thing that we've seen at Palouse River Counseling is for people that have been in service with us for a while, people that it's termed kind of seriously and persistently mentally ill. So folks that have, greatly impacts their life, may have schizophrenia, major depression, bipolar disorder, some of those kind of things. They have needed, during this pandemic, they have absolutely been affected by this process too. And so, where they needed to be seen, less frequently, we're trying to see them more frequently now. So we're touching base more often. We're really trying to work with folks, so what we call their natural supports, in a way, because sometimes their natural supports are making even sure that they have natural supports. And if they don't, then we try to recreate those, at least with Palouse River Counseling. And so, speaking to that, one of the programs we tried to open first was our day support program, because those were individuals that, were really, for lack of a better term, cut adrift, and were, really, really impacted by the isolation that occurred. And I like the term that you used, the post-traumatic stress of, having to be, people being indoors, not being able to meet with, other individuals. And it had a very significant impact on those. And we've seen that with our with people that we've worked with for a period of time. There's more, as you were describing, more suicidal ideation. And I mentioned earlier, we're seeing more people trying to manage some of this by self-medicating, whether it's with alcohol or with other substances that they're doing. I can't tell you how many primary care people or our prescriber have said, it's the exception now that they're not dealing with somebody that also has not only a mental illness that they're working with and prescribing for, but also some kind of substance use impact that also has to be addressed. Again, I wish I had more answers. I wish I had the magic bullet to do that. I will say, without trying to be, too overly optimistic, one of the things I've noticed is that those of us in the professional part of the community, I've seen a level of coordination and cooperation that I've not experienced before. And that's not to say we didn't have it before, because I tell everybody when I'm out talking in other areas that one of the things I enjoy most about Pullman and Whitman County is the level of cooperation we have across providers. And I really noticed that the entire system has stepped up their game, so to speak. I don't know that 6 months ago, I would have even thought about trying to become a practicum site with WSU. I work with them much more often now than we did before and trying to figure out, because we see students here, they're part of our practice community. And they're facing serious issues, especially as the fall semester comes up, that we need to be aware of here, at least in the behavioral health system as well. So I don't have any magic answers. I will just say that people are working hard and trying to figure out, what's the best we can do. And unfortunately, it's going to be, the best thing we could have, to be double the number of counselors that we could have, but that's not reality right here. We have challenges, recruiting and retaining, licensed, folks.
So I see both Brandon and Ann have questions. So Brandon, we'll go to you first, and then we'll go to Ann.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I realize, especially this month when we're focusing on this, that there are definitely things that become apparent. And I of course worry. You mentioned having more folks who are counselors. That from our perspective with the city, you always worry that our police officers have to take on this role of first response, when they're dealing with people that have mental health issues. And I always worry about them out on the streets, working with folks who might have no idea that they have a mental health issue or don't want help or anything like that. And that's it becomes a concern. And I have recently heard, from a number of business owners downtown who on one hand are very empathetic to folks that are struggling with things in life. And on the other hand, we see volatile situations that come up. And sometimes, even though our police are doing the best they can, they're navigating both dealing with somebody who is experiencing a mental health issue and they're not counselors, and then dealing with the legal side of things, what the law will or will not permit. And it's a real struggle. And so I appreciate your message of optimism, because we don't have all the answers, but I notice very, very well that people are working hard to try to come up with better answers, and that includes our Pullman police. I think they're doing a bang up job trying to figure this out, and how to take their officers that are on the front lines, who are not, again, they're not counselors, but trying to help give them some capacity to deal with folks that are having these challenges.
Yeah. if I could just mention a couple things about that. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And I just want to throw in our police officers here. They've come and dealt with some of the people that we work with regularly, and they have done just a phenomenal job. And I know that there are some people that have, that disagree with me about that, but I've seen that, in our building, just outside of our building, and they show the patience and the understanding that takes, and all the times I've seen it, it resolves the situation in the best way possible. I also know that it's incredibly frustrating for them when they're dealing with the same few people, or the businesses are calling about the same few people. And we've actually recently had a discussion with some of the leadership at the Pullman Police Department, and are trying to work now with the courts at Whitman County to see if there's not kind of a more intensive intervention that we can do together, treatment and the courts, especially around some of the individuals that are, just keep recycling in the same process. And I'm not a police officer, but I can't imagine that it's not incredibly frustrating when they get the same call from whatever businesses it was. And I've heard the same thing you have. I mean, the message that the business owner or the law enforcement, we want those people to get help. It's not, get them out of our site or things like that. We want them to get help.
And
again, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And you were unmuted. There you are. Okay.
Hey, thank you. Hey, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you had a long day. I oversaw you on a meeting earlier this morning in one of my colleagues' offices. But I just wanted to kind of touch on what you have already touched on, and that was that we need to basically double our capacity of care providers, and which isn't going to happen overnight. And I think the practicum idea is great because that's such a wonderful recruitment tool. But what I wanted to ask also was, what do you think, how do you see the forecast of recruiting, of expanding our caregiver network, essentially? Is that, I mean, is the care community focusing on that, or I mean, I know you're all thinking of ways to do it, but how can it actually, how can we start bringing more providers to the area, in your opinion?
Sure. Well, there's a statewide effort going on, has been going on for several years. And so, that's a piece of it. I think we have a wonderful area to try to sell to individuals. And so we use that locally. We have some challenges. We're a rural area in some ways. And so, we've had a person recently in our staff who came to the area because they were following a spouse that was going to WSU. Now that person's graduated and they're moving to another area. But I don't mind trying to sell our area to, try and recruit people. I think we have lots of advantages. So, we'll keep working on it as kind of a person at a time. But there's a national shortage, and there's an acute shortage in the state of Washington, especially of already licensed people. So part of what we do is people that have graduated, and we say, look, you can come work with us. We will help supervise the number of hours that you need, and we'll help you work towards a license. We've been able to work through the legislature and get some certain kinds of classifications too that are unique to community behavioral health folks, and so that's helped a little bit. It's going to be a process. I mean, it's
for sure. Thank you.
Okay, Nathan, we'll probably have that as the last question. Okay.
Yeah. Mike, I just, I want to ask you if you could, of course, we all meet with the legislators as well. If when that time comes around, if you could pass along something that we can do, help along that process. I know you talk to them as well, but perhaps we can lend an extra voice to that. And the other thing I want to ask you about, if you could plug at the end here, that crisis line that I know maybe not everybody knows. I try and tell everybody in the different groups that I'm a part of that if they're feeling, especially the leaders of a lot of these organizations, they've been feeling a lot of stress. The crisis line. And lastly, I think it's important that, and I'd like your opinion on this. There's a real stigma that continues to be out there about mental health and mental illness. Mental illness in particular, I think we've become a little more welcoming towards mental health, but mental illness. And I would say, if you could speak a little bit to that. I think one thing I knew as I was growing up, men in particular, if we looked for help, we were looked at as weak. And I would say this is doubly so if you're in a rural area. And so, and also, how do you feel, and just one last thing, how do you feel about the online options? I know there's some online options because we are facing a shortage here. So I know I threw a lot out at you, but yeah.
Sure. Well, let me try to be brief because I know you have other agenda items on your meeting. Let me start with the last one. The online options I think are interesting. The research is really varied right now in terms of usefulness. I think it's a tool that can work for some people. There's not a lot of indication yet how effective it is, especially over any kind of extended period of time. So I think that's really all I know about that. It's one of those other areas I'm looking forward to. I'm not sure which crisis line you were referring to. I will let people know the local one is that people can call our phone number 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days, and it will either be answered by us or by licensed counselors in our phone system. And so we contract with a group that's they're nationwide, but they're actually out of Portland. And they have, so they can talk to a live person, and that person will either help resolve the issue, or if they need to refer it to our crisis person, then that occurs. And so that's probably the most immediate one that I can speak to with that piece. Quickly, I mean, there's lots of things we can do, and I've actually really, both the city, law enforcement, our local representatives have really helped push at the legislative area. Just the funding, and I focus primarily on Medicaid funding in terms of the rate with that. And again, I've had lots of help from local leaders about that. There was a slight increase, but we were really disappointed in the level of the increase with it for this legislative session. But that's probably the primary thing that we really focus on, legislative, because that supports the infrastructure, if you will. And as well as I do that that's a lot of, it's not the new shiny thing, it's the structure that everything else is built upon. So I don't think I covered everything, Councilman Weller, but if you remind me about the other ones, I'll try to speak to it if we have time.
Thank you very much, Mike. And since you mentioned Palouse River Counseling, that you have a phone number, you might give that number too, if you just want to repeat it, just in case someone happens to be listening tonight and needs that phone call. Absolutely.
So it's area code 509-334-1133. And again, that'll be answered 24/7 by a counselor person, either someone from our staff or a counselor, a trained person from our contractor.
Mike, thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight and helping not only council, helping our public as well, and all the good work that you do there every day of the week. So we thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I feel very supported in our community. So.
And I did carry your message onto the governor's office about reciprocity for people outside the area that have their certification to see if it would count in here. And we've been taking it out of the Department of Health. So that's where it's sort of been moving its way slowly, but at least we're getting there. So,
and I really appreciate that can be a more immediate benefit because we've had people that have come from other states that would like to work and figuring out the reciprocity. So yes, Mayor Johnson, I very much appreciated your help with that. And we continue to work with the Department of Health as well about doing that.
All right. Thank you again. Next up is another presentation tonight. This one, the financial update, Mike Urban.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. It's that time again for a financial update to go over first quarter of 2021. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here and doing the old no-look meeting so I can handle both ends. As usual, I'll stop at the end of each slide and just follow up on any questions that are pertinent while that slide is still up. And we can continue chugging along through this. If there's one thing I want to kind of overemphasize, and I do use those words very carefully, is that what I'm about to show you tonight can best be described for our financial situation for the city of Pullman is that we are stable and that we do expect significant improvements as we continue the process of turning the corner and putting the pandemic behind us. The vaccines continue to take over and businesses can fully reopen. So lots of good ahead of us on the front. So let me start sharing my screen here. Okay, can everybody see what I got cooking here? Fantastic. So very similar order to usual. We'll start with the general fund again, because this supports, it has the sales tax component as part of the revenue source, and it does support a lot of our key areas of police, fire, library, recreation, overhead, lots of those non-enterprise funds like Public Works, where they have their own revenue streams. So you can see that we've started budgeting quarterly going into the 21 and 22 budget. So we're a little more apples to apples so we can see where we are. The 2021 first quarter budget was just a little over 3.3 million, and our collection rate was a robust 96.7%. So down about $11,000 versus where our estimates were. You can see it was down over the previous year, approximately $375,000. Just lots of across the board variations, but most significantly the sales tax collections. And we did kind of think about that when we were budgeting for 2021. Some of the items that we do like to follow as a council and a city is, and I feel really weird following Mike Burney up on these two items, but our liquor revenues were up $9,500, or about 8.2% over the previous period, same time last year. And our marijuana sales were down, that's not a typo, a total of $195 on sales tax collection, so approximately 1.2%. So that's the real overview of the general fund. We'll jump into some of the more details here as we go. Are there any questions? You can just jump in because I can only see two of you. Okay, let's move along. Sales tax revenue, our most volatile revenue source. Tracking fairly closely, the budget for the first quarter was just a little over $1.2 million. We're at about an 88% collection rate on the estimates. Down about $145,000 over that estimate. Total versus the previous period, down $225,000, but the really kind of an apples and oranges comparison, because the pandemic didn't really start shutting down our businesses until the end of March. So what we saw in 2021 quarter one versus 2020 quarter one there's quite a bit of difference, and that's going to be a recurring theme as we work our way through this process. And also that last item, that the one-time sales tax from construction activities, we had a very big construction year in 2020, up by the end of the year approximately 83% over the previous year. So that did have some play in this as well. Questions on sales tax? Okay. Property taxes. So I didn't budget anything for the first quarter on property tax collections because I just assume everybody's a lot like me and don't pay their taxes until April when they're due. But as you can see, it continues to trickle in year over year, a little bit here and a little bit there, quite a bit up since 2018 where it was $20,000. So when we look at this in its totality, this is a nice little bump and gives us some positive feedback going into how people might actually pay out their property taxes. So I look at the unemployment rate because that has a lot to do this. And our unemployment rate in Whitman County is 4.8% against the state's 6.1. We are still the second lowest in the state for county unemployment, behind Asotin at 4.5. So a very important indicator on this, since our property tax collections are also directly tied to paying off our bond debts. So those come in at the same time. So I'll give you a little preview because we have received our April distribution, even though I'm not reporting on it here. And we still have 2 more distributions to get in the second quarter here for May and June. But our collection rate is, as of today, we're 54,000 behind last year through the second quarter. So little apples and different type of apples, but I think our collection rate is strong. More on that in the second quarter when we actually have those final numbers, but folks are paying their property taxes. Any questions on this one? Okay, more on this in July. This will be a very important discussion in July. So our utility revenue, the quarter one budget was $608,000. We collected at 113% of that. So up 82,000 over projections, still down from last year, again, due to less folks in town. So less chances for revenue that way. When you look at the natural gas number, even though it's down 17.8%, 2020 was an unusually high year on natural gas anyway. So bringing that back in line, I'm not too terribly concerned about this number as of today. Electricity is down about what I would expect considering the population change. And the city-owned utilities over the previous year, part of that is the population change, part of that is our collection rate. And I've been sending monthly updates on our aging and seeing how that works out. I do have a slide a little later where I'm going to talk about help for folks that could qualify for getting some utilities paid. But that program is still out there. Any questions on utility collections? Building permit revenue. This is a great indicator of potential one-time construction-related sales tax coming through the door. Now, please remember I said earlier that 2020 was a very big year for collecting one-time sales tax, and you can see, wow, we're up 435% over last year at this time. And generally, I'd be super excited about that, but I am an accountant and a pragmatist. We're also fighting that since a lot of these building permits came in, the cost of raw materials have gone through the roof. And a lot of people that have pulled permits are kind of in a holding pattern to see if these materials go down in price before they really start the heavy construction. But they do have a work through plan, and we do have a plan through our inspections and buildings department to make sure that pulled permits can continue on without relative delay, as long as they're showing activity over certain periods of time. The other piece to mention is in 2020, at the next quarter, we had that basic lockdown. Nothing happened. So this is going to be a really interesting number to look at the end of the next quarter to see how the metrics prove out. We're cautiously optimistic. We've permitted 98 duplexes on one project, 80 townhomes and 6 apartments, and a multi-story mixed-use building on another with another developer. So this Pullman continues to grow, and you can see it through right here. Any questions on this one?
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
So do you think that us being up 172,000, that will help with the cut we're going to have in the next quarter? What was do you know what the revenue was in the second quarter last year? I mean, I know you said about 0, but
I don't have that at my fingertips, but that is a question I will email council on before I go home tonight.
it would just be interesting for me to know if we're going to be able to make up for some of the losses with this 172,000 that we're ahead this year.
Yeah. And, sure. And it's the permit part of this too. So as the actual materials start showing up in town, there's that whole piece of it too. So extrapolating that out, just, making sure developers can, make their payments to the bank, and, seeing a reduction in the cost of raw goods will certainly help that along, but I don't know how many that'll completely deter to say, well, let's just stop versus let's pace this project along a little bit. I've had some informal contact or conversations with Jeremy Moore down in the inspections, and he's going to do some light poking around with folks that he's close to and see if we can get some better indicators instead of just conjecture at this point, but it's reasonable conjecture. Okay, I'll get that answered. Good question. Okay, forward. Streets and arterial streets. So we just finished the general fund, some of those top items. Now we're into the enterprise funds. We collected 117% of our estimates on the revenue budget for streets and arterial streets. And again, it's down versus the same period last year. And I'm going to say the same thing. It's probably due to COVID-related activities because there is a utility component to these collections as well. Real estate excise tax up 16.5% over the previous year. We'll see how that holds over the next quarter when we were doing the slowdowns last year and real estate kind of really ground to a halt. And fuel tax, as we are not out doing normal, expectedly is down $15,000 over the previous period last year, about 14%. So increase of 89,000 over what we had budgeted is very helpful in this fund. Any questions on this one? Okay. All right, so here is the pure utility funds revenue. This is where most of the money comes in to keep that enterprise going, our public works department. The revenue budget was 3.6 million, almost 3.7. We missed that mark by $491,000. Again, same thing. Less people in town, and some collections, through the process. One of the things that we have is we got a moratorium on shutoffs. As of today, it's still through the end of July, and same with no collection on interested fees through the end of October. But to the Pullman City Council's credit, they were way ahead of the state on this. This is one of the first things we were told when COVID started shaking down, and you guys put this in effect for our community, and to the point where It served the community well as far as the dollars are going through. We're working with folks to make sure that they are able to pay their bills. There's COVID payment plan that we put into effect in July of last year, and we still have front and center on our website, and we're encouraging people to look at that. But what we're also encouraging people that if you qualify under the Community Actions Financial Assistance Plan, you can contact them directly at 509-334-9147. And this piece is in the agenda permanently too. So if you don't have a chance to write it down for those folks watching, I'm stalling just a hair so you can. There is some help out there for folks and more help on the way with the American Rescue Plan dollars to make sure that those that qualify can pay their portion. Yep, that was it on this slide. Any questions? Okay. Transit revenues. The revenue budget for the first quarter was 1.5 million. We came in at 1.9. A lot of that has to do with Wayne Thompson pulling grants, and he continues to be a grant wizard because we got notified yesterday that for the 2021-2023 cycle, we're going to get another electric bus. So good news for us. We got the charging station built out. We're looking at some other operational items, but you know, the FTA grant, operating grant certainly helped. Another difference is that the CARES dollars that came through that went into transit through the FTA were a little more generous than what we got to play with at the city. More time to spend it out, multiple years, and a lot more opportunities to spend it to where we were a lot more restricted. So you'll see some of those expenditures coming out later on in the transit expenditures, but that's where our revenues ended up. Any questions on this? Okay. And then another fund that we like to keep our eye on before we switch to expenses is the Civic Improvement Fund. This is primarily hotel and motel tax for our revenue source. We had budgeted $22,000 for the first quarter. We came in more than double. So thank everybody for coming and staying in Pullman and staying in our hotels. Please come back when you can and we can be safe. We would love to see you again. The hotel motel tax is not as strong as in the past, but better days are certainly ahead of us. We're also working on several tourism items that are related to this, whether they're the marketing and promotion plan we're working on. There's the grant we applied for that we're waiting to hear on through the USDA. And there's a couple things we talked about very quickly last week that could be available to us through the American Rescue Plan. So this kind of ties up the revenues. Are there any questions before I move on to expenses? Okay. So we'll start with the general fund in its totality. We had budgeted $5.6 million of expenses in the general fund for the first quarter. We came in just a hair over 5 million at 5,059,000. So 564,000 below the estimate, about a 90% expenditure rate. Over the same period last year, you can see we're down significantly, $1.1 million. A lot of that it's attributable to several factors, but a lot of that is capital purchases, most notably the City Hall construction using some CIP dollars to help fund that. That did come through the general fund. But these next 7 slides will get more into the details in each of these work areas and get a better idea of how that looks. But yeah, overall, I'd sum it up as to capital purchases and construction costs are down. And one of the things that we did do with our budget is we looked hard at our capital purchases and used it as a cash flow tool while we were waiting to see what would happen in the first quarter as we turned the corner on COVID, and slid what we could into the second, third, and fourth quarters, not eliminating them, just giving us some breathing room as we could see how things would come out of the winter, because the winter revenues were dire predictions by the state and other talking heads. So there was that component too that I don't want to, shy away from. It was an intentional strategy. Cash flow. It was about cash flow in the first quarter. Any questions on the general fund as a totality? Okay. So we're going to start with the legislative expenses. They are up, but they're attributable to one thing, and one thing only I can see, and that was the election and voter registration that were charged through the county auditor. It's double of what we were paying in 2019 when I got here. So that's an expense that I've sent regular notes to council when we get notices from the county auditor and how that's going. So $63,000 increase, and most of that lives in the voter registration part, a little bit in insurance too. I'll get into that in the next slide a little bit more, but I'm not terribly concerned about this, because that's a expense it's critical that we pay, but how we make up the difference, there's a lot of tools at our discretion right now. But at the end of the day, we're probably going to need a budget amendment in this fund to make sure that the expenditures are nice and tidy. Those will come back in December. Any questions on this one? Okay. So finance and administration expenses, our budget for the first quarter was almost 380,000. We came in at 321, about an 84% expenditure rate, down $58,000 over where we thought it would be. And the decrease on this is directly attributable to two very distinct things. As the CIP expenses for the City Hall construction were flowing through these funds, and those are gone. And then we also absorbed the entirety of the general fund insurance expenses through these funds, and that's something we changed with the 21-22 budget. We started sending those out to the departments that they actually affected, so we'd have a much better idea of how much it takes to operate these departments, instead of having this fund solely tucked away here. And then also giving department managers a chance to help curb their own expenses, because a lot of our insurance, especially liability, is based on two things. It's incidents, and that only accounted for 30% of how we split this out, but worker hours, and that accounted for the other 70% of how the liability insurance paid out. So, when we talk about curbing overtime and watching these things, though, those decisions and those opportunities does help their budgets go down because there's less worker hours. But it is a huge drop over the previous year. And if you look at it versus 19, 18, 17, that's the difference really was the insurance. Any questions? Okay. So now we go right into law enforcement, and their budget for the first quarter was $1.9 million, and they came in at at 1.7 with an expenditure rate of 89%. So $215,000 below what their estimated budget was, up 10% over the same period as last year, that 165. But almost all that increase versus 2020 and 2021 is attributable to the reallocation of the insurance during the budget process. I'm really focused on what the budget was and what it came in at, and how we're looking at things there. So, questions on law enforcement? Okay, fire and ambulance. Again, a lot of the same, 1.8 8.5 million there to the expenditure budget. They expended out 1.7 at a 92, almost 93% rate of their estimates. So down 136,000 versus budgeted. And again, over the same period, it's up to 138 attributable to the insurance. And then there was one other small piece we did that the police department used to pick up the entire cost of the dispatching fees to Whitcomb. We looked at several years back and reallocating that fairly between police and fire and sliding a percentage over into the fire budget. So again, we could see a little bit more how much fire is an ambulance is truly costing us. So their portion of the dispatch fees are over there now and not absorbed by police anymore. Okay, questions on fire and ambulance? Okay. Ah, lost my cursor. There we go. Community and economic development expenses. This is the planning department, protective inspections and buildings, economic development, and then going into next quarter, we're going to start including the GIS portion in here as well. After some talk with the finance director, that we've determined that this is really where it should be living instead of public works. So we'll be making some adjustments on that going forward. The budget was just over $300,000, and we came in 23,000 below that at 277,000. 92% expenditure rate over the estimate, down last year over the same period last year, primarily due to professional fees. We had some Burke Consulting in there last year to get the comprehensive plan going, and those just weren't expended this year yet as we work through the comp plan. So that one, there is an insurance component to it, but it's also very small because there's not a lot of people that work in this group when you add them all up. Any questions on this slide? Okay. Library expenses, very similar. $427,000 expenditure budget. They came in at $342,000. This is one department that we were hoping to allow them to start by doing some capital purchases earlier than some others because they were waylaid so hard last year during COVID. So we had some first quarter capital items for them, but as we saw the numbers come in lower and lower on sales tax, I worked with Joanna and asked her to kind of put a hold on that until the second quarter. And as we are seeing some improving numbers here from our last batch of collections, and then we have another collection report next week, we're hoping to be able to start turning some of those dollars loose and increasing our material buys. So it's a little different on this one than the others. And we do consider books more of a capital expenditure here because just of the volume that goes on, and not just books, other materials too. And I apologize, I don't mean to diminish that. But the expenditure rate overall against the budget is 80%, and the same period we were down $20,000 over the previous year, about 5%. So staffing and capital purchases were the big items on that. Any questions on the library?
Yeah, Mike, Nathan Weller here.
Hey.
Hey, so I know with now, can you kind of, I've heard that our library employees staff went from, was it 28 down to 2 or 3 during the pandemic, and now they're up back around, I think, 12. And I know a lot of their expenditures had been, a lot of their materials had been shouldered by the Friends of the Library. So I would like, to ask a little bit because, the library, in my opinion, I know essential services are it's police, fire are looked at as essential services. In my opinion, the library, especially in our community, where one of our biggest assets is our intellectual capital here. And I really, really feel that the library is part of that essential service. You know, it's a community meeting place for everyone. You know, it helps everyone from, you know, those that are in poverty to the people that are at the highest rungs of economic prosperity. And so, you know, I've heard quite a bit about the Friends shouldering a lot of these materials, and I feel like we're kind of letting the library down quite a bit as a city when they shoulder quite a bit. And fortunately, they do have the Friends there to help them out. And I think everybody on the council knows it's no secret that I am a major supporter of the library. It was my second home growing up here in Pullman. But it also provides a second home and a meeting place for so many in our community. So can you speak a bit about how, you know, why the Friends had to really shoulder so much of the material expenses, and how we went from, what was it, 28 down to 2 employees, and now we're getting back up. I'll be quiet.
Okay, the 28 to 2 is easy because the state of Washington during COVID operations did not provide library guidance until late. So we weren't able to even do curbside for quite some time. And then the reopening was a completely different story on top of that as well. So Joanna has a return to work plan. We talk every Friday about comfort level and city services and what we can bring back. And certainly we were charging along to more time until we got knocked back into phase 2. And now that we're in phase 3, we're looking at additional opportunities for reopening. The Friends of the Library have been very generous and offered to continue to buy media while we were holding the budget. And when you look at the media and the pause on that, it wasn't a fact that a bunch of items went away. The framework, and there was a base, a foundation, if you will, of items that were still available there for circulation. It was just continuing to add to these items. And we do appreciate the Friends because they've been so generous. One of the things that really kind of hurt us, though, if you look at the expenses, and I'm looking at a line item for software licenses for the first quarter, for the library was just over $55,000 of that $342,000 expenditure. So while not being able to get deep into library services, because we were still primary curbside during that first quarter, and we were reopening and putting hours in, half hour to slot, and working with Joanna based on her recommendations on how that would continue. The mayor and I keep meeting with her at 1 o'clock on Fridays. But having that $55,000 of software expense that people couldn't utilize because they're not in the library was certainly a damper when you look at that, because that's about 12.5% of the total expenditures for 2021 Q1.
Now, but that was something ongoing from previously, right? I mean, it's not something that our director was like, okay, we're just throwing in licenses here. I mean, we had to keep that going from previous, if I recall, especially with Microsoft and some of their things. That's not something we can just drop, correct?
I want to work with Joanna to see how many of those software licenses are critical infrastructure, and there is an increasing cost on licenses every year. No software company leaves it exactly the same as the previous. We see increases anywhere from 3 to 8% on all software. That's why we're tracking it differently in BARS numbers now, because everything was getting tucked into professional fees. So we couldn't tell what our professional fees were versus our dues and subscriptions versus software licenses. So it's a terribly expensive and large part of the IT department because that's all they're doing. But there are some activities that are certainly library specific where these things would go in there. Some of them have been going on for several years. Some of them are new, and I can't remember the name of the item that we started last year, but it was a self-checkout, and the name is just fluttering away. And it was brand new last year at this time as well. It might have been the second quarter. I'd want to look at that for sure.
Okay. And I know Ann is, if Ann wants to speak about any of this, I know from my standpoint, the traditional philosophy is looking at these fire and all of these as essential. And I really feel very, very strongly that the library should be looked at as, kind of in that same realm, because it adds to the cultural basis of our city. It really, like I already have mentioned, creates a place for people to gather, of course, outside of the pandemic. And that material is really, really important for so many people, regardless of economic, level. So I'm just voicing my opinion here, but I think moving forward, especially into the future, and that access, computer access, is so extremely important in the classes, ESL, everything like that. So that's my opinion, but I appreciate you sharing some of that information. So.
Sure.
And Mike, this is Ann. I just wanted to add in too, I agree with what Nathan has said. In regards to the software licenses, I know as the council board member on the library board, Joanne and the staff are continually assessing programs that they use, and they look at, she looks at how many patrons and the percentage of time, or the percentage of how many patrons are using it month to month. And she is seeing, if she sees an increase or a level measurement, she'll keep it going. But just at our last meeting, she mentioned that she was looking at a couple of programs that just weren't really being used. And so she's considering not renewing them. And so I just want the public to know too, that you and the mayor, along with her, I've been seeing and hearing that you three meet every Friday, and in the interim, she's really working to, and has been, to really keep her operation very tight and accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, if you will. And to that point, and to Nathan's point of it as a community center, the library also serves the community in continue access to the internet, both through the Wi-Fi program that Joanne and you all created or extended, I guess, during COVID, where we had the Wi-Fi on all the time and people could come into the parking lot. And now we have, through a grant, the library is rolling out and is implementing right now a mobile hotspot checkout. We have, I think she's got 12 or 20 devices that patrons can check out a mobile hotspot. So if you don't have internet at home, or you need a boost because you've got so many people in your home using it at the same time, you can now check one out for free. This is a trial basis that we're trying, but that's another really important way that the library is continuing to be innovative and trying to meet the needs as they change and shift. So I too am interested in when they can. I've been hearing not only from the library board, Joanna, but through friends of mine and residents who are patrons, that yes, we really would like to see some funds made available as soon as possible for materials acquisition, because the library is really starting to feel the pinch on that. And they have been one of the most they've been impacted very much, even in spite of their small size. It's still a large impact. So I wanted to pass that along and just thank all of you for the work that you're doing to keep our library open during these difficult times, and to do as much as the library's been able to.
Yeah, our three departments that got hit the hardest with COVID will be the parks, buildings, recreation slides that are about to come, the library, and the senior center. And the only area that we had less guidance and slower than the library on was the senior center. To this date, we still have no guidance from the state on that about reopening. But the library guidance was very, very, very slow. So being able to even do something as simple as curbside took a lot longer than other opportunities that were presented to us. So yes, I wrote some notes here, and I will be following up with Joanna on some of these things, and then keep you posted on reopening activities as they're determined.
Thank you.
Okay, so there you are. Another department that took a hard hit during COVID, parks and facilities and our recreation department. This is our last general fund slide. The budget is for expenditures was $617,000. It came in at $507,000. We were hoping to do a few more programs throughout the quarter, but sliding back to phase 2 stunted a few things, and some programs really, as we advertised them, took off, and we had to figure out ways to add more because of the pent-up demand. And some just were some learning experiences too, but the crew works really hard on trying to develop good rec programs. A couple Mondays ago, 3 Mondays ago, when we put out our summer catalog, that Monday was the single biggest sign-up Monday ever in the city of Pullman. So with that pent-up demand, we're looking to continue to add programs to make sure our folks can get out and expend some energy. Parks continues to do more with less. They're keeping up on the parks, but as we start to get out and in them more, hiring some seasonal folks to do some things in there and bring our parks right up to where they need to be. But our decrease versus the previous year was, again, sliding some of those capital purchases into other quarters, and then staffing, since we're not completely full staffing and the seasonals are just coming on. That was one of the big differences with this group. Any questions on this slide? Okay, we got just a few more left. So streets and arterial streets, expenditure budget was $670,000, came in about $150,000 less at a 80% expenditure clip. A lot of the difference you're seeing between the 2020 versus 21 is there was a component of new city hall in here. So that and the reduced other capital expenditures keep it right where it was. If you look at it through 17, 18, 19, we continue to spend on our streets and arterial streets. A lot of activity on Spring Street right now as well, if you're out and about. And a note for folks traveling in the Spring Street area, local traffic, if you need to get across for whatever, do so very, 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 very carefully. But we can get you from point A to point B. The utilities expenses, $3,110,000 expected budget. We had an 81% expenditure rate at $2.5 million. Same period last year. I mean, again, look at the numbers. It doesn't look like much of a drop, but it was 1.7 million, or 40% change, and that decrease was the capital purchase and some construction projects. And because of the construction projects, there's some associated professional services that we haven't expended yet that'll be in later quarters this year. Any questions on utilities? Okay. Transit. Again, the CARES Act funds through FTA came through here and helped with some of these expenditures, even though we budgeted 984,000 and 1.3 million has been expensed or encumbered for buses that are on their way, which we expect in a couple weeks, 4 weeks, I believe. Our expenditures are up, but we've done some the electrical upgrades to the facility as well that slid into the first quarter of this year to get ready for those electric buses coming in. So although the expenditure looks a little high, I'm not terribly concerned about it yet. And as we continue to have dollars come through federally and through the state, the transit system still remains healthy. Any questions on transit? Okay. Last one of these types of slides is the Internal Services Fund. Again, for folks that aren't familiar with this is our enterprise funds specifically for the city. So our equipment rental division that takes care of our equipment and rolling stock, our buildings division, which takes care of obviously all our buildings, and our IT department. So the budget for these folks were $1,365,000. Expenditures actually came in just under 1.2 million. Difference of $176,000 and an 87% expenditure rate. So down 509,000 over the previous period, and that is directly attributable to some capital purchases that we did very early in 2020, some major switches that needed to be fixed. And we continue to fix our critical infrastructure and work towards full deployments on computer replacement and those items. Any questions on internal service funds? Okay, so just a couple final thoughts here. I said it earlier, just kind of really, if I can encapsulate the whole thing, is we're still not apples to apples. And honestly, I know we're well into the second quarter. I hope we're never apples to apples comparing a COVID year to a COVID year. I'm ready to turn the corner on this and get the community back up and running. The 2021 I touched on several times, but there was a cash flow part of this that the previous city administrator and I worked on as the strategy is to slide some things back into the second, third, and fourth quarters while still doing the emergent items early on instead of in previous years where it's January 1st, it's a new budget, I'm going to go out and do all my expenditures. We wanted to preserve cash flow in an uncertain time, because when this budget was put together and everybody started working on it last of July, we were, knee deep in what we had no idea what the health and economic ramifications of COVID are. We're still not out of it yet, but we're feeling like that change is coming, and we're starting to see a lot of positive signs. The update on the unanticipated sales tax refund. We were down to try to fill the hole on about $32,000. The number has come up, but not because of any significant financial issues. It's if we're going to be reopening June 30th, like the governor is going to let us, getting a senior coordinator in by the end of this quarter so we can start after June 30th and service that group is going to need to be addressed. The way things were going the last time we talked, we thought it was going to be well into the third quarter and we were going to trickle out, and there would eventually be some guidance from the state as far as the senior center operations go, but it looks like they're just going to throw the doors wide open here at the end of next month, and we need to get staff in and ready to help on that. So I want to make a pivot on that particular item. But as you can see through some of the, although the revenues aren't quite as high, the expenditures weren't nearly as high either. And I think there's some mutual savings that could be found in there to finish filling this gap. And that's something by the time we come to the end of the second quarter report to have down to zero or nearly zero. We still haven't heard back from the state on the 2018, 19, and 20 portions of their audit that they're working on for this tax refund. but the rest we've been able to absorb, and they've continued to allow us to stagger it out to help with our cash flow payments. And then my last item is the American Rescue Plan. I'm not really going to belabor this a lot because our next item is talking about this in a little more extent. So I'll save most of my comments for that. Suffice to say, this is our second cash injection from the federal government, and it's a significant amount of money compared to the CARES dollars. No, you know, and this is federal, not state. We haven't seen any financial assistance from the state yet, but there's restrictions that come with these federal dollars, and I'm ready to jump into that as soon as I finish answering questions on this presentation. So thank you, Council. Let me stop my share.
And I don't see any questions at this point, so let's move on to the initial briefing on the American Rescue Plan.
Switching. Okay, so the American Rescue Plan, and I don't have a PowerPoint to go with this. It's being called a couple different things at a couple different levels. I have adopted the acronym, as we like in government, of calling it ARP, because that's what the Association of Washington Cities is calling it, and that's where I'm getting all my best information right now, because that is how Pullman is directly affected. They're doing a wonderful job of synthesizing things, starting to put together some webinars and helping the cities out. So the long and the short for folks that are tuning in, maybe first time on this, is on in March of 2021, the federal government passed a very large spending bill for the response to the pandemic. And on May 10th, they did release Department of Treasury their first initial guidance on how these dollars could be spent. And council will find the fact sheet and the frequently asked question sheet of the current version in their packets. And we know that frequently asked question sheet will grow significantly. If you remember how the CARES Act started at a few pages and then turned into 50 or more pages as folks started to explore this a little bit. And that's kind of where we are. When I put this item together, we had the guidance for not quite 48 hours, so I can get it into the agenda and get it in front of everybody to start discussing. So tonight's briefing is really the first of what's going to be many discussions to make sure that we're not only receiving our dollars properly, but we're maintaining the council goals and priorities, serving our community, and making sure we deploy these dollars in the parameters given to us by not only the federal Department of Treasury. Once it gets determined which state group will be our contact point, we need to get a hold of them, a lot like I did with the Department of Commerce and the CARES dollars, and get some of our questions answered, and then follow up with the Washington State Auditor to make sure that these expenditures will in fact pass audit, and that we won't be having to pay any of this back. So we want to be absolutely right on these. So the early indication on this, unofficial numbers, is we stand to receive just over $7.5 million from the federal government on this. And it's going to come in two payments. The first have to occur, and this is a quote, very soon from the feds, and then the second half in approximately 1 year. The spend out is set to end by December 31st, 2024. But once again, we need to find out if that is a hard date, because there's two things going on. When they did this with the CARES dollars with us, we thought we had until the end of December, and they said, no, because you're not an entitlement city, you have to be done sooner. So that's a question we certainly need to ask, but there is a provision as well in the frequently asked questions that I'm going to touch on that says if we have projects committed, we can actually have until December 31st of 2026 to finish any larger capital projects. Again, we want to confirm that with the state organization and see if that's a hard date that they're going to honor at the federal level, or if they're going to ask us to turn in stuff early for the state. So that's that page. So the overall, the broad strokes on eligible expenses, as they've been presented to us, again, are responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, covering costs incurred for the public health emergency, very broad, replacing lost, delayed, or decreased revenues due to COVID-19, addressing negative economic impacts on local businesses and nonprofits, and making necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And if you spent a little time in the frequently asked questions, there's a bunch of the yeah, buts are starting to pop up. And that's why it's really important that we talk to our state designees as soon as we can. So yesterday at 5 o'clock, the first round of CIP and TIP items were due in, so we could start putting that process together and working with the Planning Commission, the City Council, and the CIP TIP Committee. So we're going to be looking at those projects very carefully over the next couple of weeks as well, and seeing what might qualify for these dollars. We have the notes from the City Council goal setting session on March 6th, and we have another revisit of those on June 26th. So I will be back in front of you for another discussion on the American Rescue Plan on June 22nd, right, going into that meeting. So we can hear what we've learned so far from the state, and really continue to distill this information until we have some actionable items that we can bring to council and say, what do you think about this first go around? The other piece of that is the BDS Downtown Master Plan. Kevin Gardis will be back in front of you June 8th, I believe, to discuss priorities for those projects. That's something we're already looking at very carefully in CIP, TIP, and we're trying to identify some of those projects that we can bring to you as part of the American Rescue Plan. Process-wise, to get that adopted, it needs to go in front of Planning Commission, and they are knee deep in the comp plan update. So we really are going to work with them and make sure that that gets done, and they get to spend the time that they need to bring a document to the City Council for adoption. And then right afterwards, we're going to bring the BDS study as well for the same process. But we don't want to leave some of those projects languishing, even though the full plan hasn't been adopted yet. So we have been spending a lot of time in that plan, because we know that one of the most important council goals was the downtown revitalization. Lots of information coming through. The National League of Cities has already put on a really brief webinar on this, but haven't really dug into the deep yet. I'm really waiting for that MRSC AWC item to see how Washington cities are affected, and it's definitely coming. But we work on this constantly, and we're trying to come up with a list of, for lack of a better term, menu items for the council to take some hard looks at by analyzing the goals and priorities, as well as some of the discussion items that came through CARES, and support the council goals of recovery, retention, and recruitment. So I just want to touch on the documents real quick that the feds sent out. I'm going to start in the fact sheet. As we all know, the devil's really in the details, and making sure we do things according to the dollars that are sent is going to take a lot of research on our part, because we want to make sure we bring you the right projects and what's best for your community, as well as passes muster with the federal and state agencies. So we are going to have a lot more discussions on this as the information becomes more lucid. A lot of this is redundant. I'm going to touch on replacing lost public sector revenue for a little bit. Sounded great, and those are wonderful words, because I get all excited because our admissions tax certainly took a hit and all these other items. But when you get into the frequently asked questions, they're not looking at it on an item by item basis. They're looking at it in an aggregate. So there's a formula involved, and I'm going to be working with the finance staff to see exactly where we are on that one. So I'll touch on that in a second here. Nope. So let me just touch on a couple of the frequently asked questions that jumped out at me from the beginning that I thought would be important for council to know at this point in the game. Number 6 is, are the use of the funds allowable under the relief to the emergency allowable the same as they were under CARES? And the answer is, yeah, generally it's going to be. There's been some broadening of definitions, of course, but each one will take and look at it on its own individual perspective. But, you know, if we start with that CARES mentality, that builds the framework for adding more things. Number 7, the use of funds is not explicitly permitted as a response to the health emergency. Does that mean it's prohibited? Yeah, that's one of the ones that they like to put in and say, yeah, just because it doesn't say you can't do it doesn't mean we can't change our mind a little bit later. And that's kind of alluding to my fact on how those frequently asked questions grow as the days go on. Number 9, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of these. What types of services are eligible as a response to the negative economic impacts of the pandemic? This one really provides a lot more detail than the broad strokes that I mentioned earlier. It gets in there, but it's not very deep as well. This one was important, number 11, because we were wondering when the period started for this. Does it go back to when COVID started or January 1st, or it goes back to March 3rd of 2021, except for one item, which I'll get to here in a second. So the period has started, and we're going to go back and look at some invoices that may qualify. May recipients use funds for general economic development or workforce deployment? Generally not. So we're going to have to really get specific on how COVID affected some of these projects that we've been talking about loosely in our individual conversations, but we certainly can get there. Number 17. Will revenue be calculated on an entity-wide basis or on a source-by-source basis, like by property tax, income tax, and sales tax? And this is where I felt kind of deflated when I read this, because the recipients should count it on the entity-wide. So the things that we did really well on, like one-time sales tax on construction, how it covered some of the regular retail, we're not going to be able to split that out. They want it all aggregated together, and that on number 20, you'll notice there's a formula, and we're going to want to spend some time with that and proving that up. But on number 19, how I mentioned a little earlier, how March 3rd was the start date. It's the start date except for one item, and that's 2020 revenues. We can go back to our 2020 revenues and measure that against previous years and claim a loss on that and move some money over there. So they're setting up 4 loss points on these. So the end of each year, 20, 21, 22, and 23, we can do as look back periods, not by the month, not by however we do it. Those are hard dates. So that December 31, 2020 is a previous date that we could still go back and look at for lost revenues. No. Number 32, I alluded to this earlier. That's the one where it says we can go past 2024 if we have obligated the funds. We'll confirm that with the state and make sure they're not changing the dates on those and making us go earlier. I think that was my last note. Yeah. It was. So, this is where things stand today. We're early in the process, but we want to be regular reporting and keeping council up to date on what is and is not available to us as we start to figure out these projects. It looks like we got a lot longer spend out period than CARES. So I know there's some projects that will take some time to put together, and we want to be cognizant of that. But, the hurry up and spend and report by the end of 2020 has kind of gone away, so we can be a lot more meticulous with these dollars and do a lot more input as time goes on and have regular updates and meetings on that. So that is sorry, I wish it was briefer, but brief yet comprehensive first run at the American Rescue Plan with the information we have today.
Sorensen, see your hands up.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, with the state being the one that's passing this money out and not the federal government, is the federal government directing them on how much money the cities are going to get, or is the state deciding that?
So yeah, the non-entitlement cities like Pullman, because we don't do CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, we don't get our money directly from the feds. So the state does have that allocation, and it looks like they're using a very similar allocation than the CARES grant, and that was a population view.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Nathan.
Yeah, more of a comment. Mike, I didn't say it right after the budget overview. Thank you so much. You provided a lot of information. I know you're saying, sorry it wasn't more brief, but I tell you what, it keeps us in the know, and just want to tell you, lots of work. It's very much appreciated. So just thank you for doing a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And with Jonna just getting here, and I still have my war wounds from the CARES Act, I'm taking the lead on this particular issue so I can work more directly with council on the goals and priorities.
Our next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. These items are considered routine in nature. And do I hear a motion to read by title only?
So moved. Second.
Moved and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, Laura McAloon, our city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. Your consent agenda consists of a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the meeting of May 11, 2021, and approve them as submitted. A motion to approve disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 103142 through 03195, totaling $413,084. A motion to approve disbursements for accounts payable checks numbered 103196 through 103213, electronic transfers 1314 709 and 715 through 720, and payroll direct deposits numbered 68561 through 68885, totaling $1,304,996.49. A motion to renew an ambulance billing contract with Systems Design West LLC. A motion to accept the Pullman Transit Bus and Transit Facility Camera Recording and Monitoring Systems contract as complete. And resolution number R-30-21, a resolution authorizing the execution of a second amendment to the interlocal agreement for enhanced 911 emergency communications and dispatch system.
Is there any item the council would like out for discussion? Seeing none, the consent agenda consists of items 1 through 6. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we now move to the regular agenda. First is a resolution, R-3121, a resolution of the city of Pullman declaring certain property surplus to the city needs and authorizing the means of disposal. Gary Jenkins, our police chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, City Council. All of our police officers are required to wear a ballistic vest while working patrol. The city purchases the vests, which are fitted to each individual officer. Vests have an effective lifespan of 5 years. One of our officers, who was hired in March of 2020, has decided to relocate to another area and has subsequently been hired by the Walla Walla County Sheriff's Department. Walla Walla County asked if they could purchase the officer's ballistic vest since it's already fitted to the officer. Since we no longer have use for the vest, staff recommends selling the vest to Walla Walla County for the value of the prorated remaining 4-year lifespan of the vest. That sale would fund 80% of a 5-year ballistic vest for a new police officer. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on this item? Then do I hear a motion on this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Laura, would you read the resolution, please?
Resolution number R-31-21, a resolution clicked on the wrong one. A resolution of the City of Pullman, Washington, declaring certain property surplus to the city's needs and authorizing the means of disposal.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item number 2 is a resolution authorizing the submittal of an ecology grant application to the Washington State Department of Ecology for the purpose of required periodic review of the city's Shoreline Master Program. RJ Laud.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. So the city is required to update its Shoreline Master Program under this state's Shoreline Management Act once every 8 years. The City of Pullman is included in the 4th round of periodic reviews, and that is due on or before June 30th, 2023. The Washington State Department of Ecology provides a no-match grant to help assist in this review. Grants for cities are based on population. Therefore, Pullman is eligible for a $22,400 grant, and that is for cities with population between 20,000 and 50,000. The City of Pullman last updated its Shoreline Master Program in 2016, and that version can be located in the city's municipal code 16.55. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Shoreline Master Program, it is essentially within the City of Pullman, it is the South Fork of the Palouse River, including 200 feet landward of the ordinary high water mark. Grant applications for the review are due June 30th, 2023, but are not yet available. However, work done after July 1st, 2021 can be applied towards the funds. Are there any questions?
Seeing none, do I hear a motion on this resolution?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Moved and second. Laura, would you read the resolution, please?
Apologies, we're a little out of order.
I can do it if you got it here. Resolution 3221, a resolution authorizing the submittal of an ecology grant application to the Washington State Department of Ecology for the purpose of required periodic review of the city's Shoreline Master Program. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Our next item is a resolution pre-authorizing the acceptance of a U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Aviation Administration Airport Improvement Program grant. And with that, we have the Executive Director of the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport, Tony Bean, on the line. Tony?
Thanks, Mayor, Council. So I have an indulgence to ask of the Council. After discussion with the FAA and the consultant team today, the request is to double the amount of authority for the mayor and the finance director to be able to accept from $6 million to $12 million. And that would bring the match to $1,053,338. And the match comes from the Airport Cares Grant. But this is in relation to the cost of concrete for the apron and a de-icing pad. So it's things that we have to do with aircraft on that apron. As we're moving forward, those things are getting detailed out fairly quickly, so that there is a change to request from the 6 to up to 12 million. I would like to thank all the council members that attended the open houses that we had either in Pullman or in Moscow to come take a look at the concept and budget report for the new terminal. And on a positive note, the third flight starts on the 20th, arrives at 4:55 into Pullman, and leaves at 5:30ish.
So any questions on this grant? We've had some pre-authorizations before. This is just an anticipation to make sure that we get it and we can
Yep.
get it in the system as quickly as possible. Any questions of Tony on this one? Then do I hear a motion on this resolution?
I wholeheartedly move to adopt.
Second.
Jack? All right, and Laura, this item resolution.
I will, and then I would note it would probably be appropriate. The only time that 6 million is called out is in the first whereas in the draft resolution that was in your packet. So I think we can administratively change that whereas it's not part of the action. The action just authorized the acceptance of the grant. So it's resolution number R-33-21, a resolution pre-authorizing the acceptance of U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, Airport Improvement Program grant monies for Pullman Moscow Regional Airport project supporting terminal design and apron construction.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. And item number 4 is a motion to authorize staff to apply for a 2021 Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act program grant. And once again, Gary Jenkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Suicide kills more law enforcement officers annually than line of duty deaths. In 2019, 228 law enforcement officers died by suicide, while 134 died in the line of duty. The negative focus on law enforcement these past few years has added stress to what is already a stressful career, even for officers in a community that supports them and with city leaders that support them as well. In an effort to address officer mental health and wellness, we recently worked with a vendor to customize a wellness app for our staff. And that app was deployed in March of this year. The U.S. Department of Justice has recognized the need to address the mental health of law enforcement staff. Through the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, Department of Justice is soliciting proposals for grant funding to improve delivery and access related to mental health and wellness services for law enforcement. While the full details of our proposal have not been finalized, I'd like to revitalize a peer support program in which select staff is trained to provide mental health and wellness support to their coworkers. I'd also like to explore the possibility of expanding this peer support program by collaborating with other law enforcement agencies in our area to increase the flexibility and availability as a regional resource. This grant will provide benefits to commission officers and support staff. The 2021 Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act program grant is a competitive funding opportunity offering approximately 57 grants of up to $125,000 each over a 2-year period with no match required. Applications are due by June 3rd of this year. Awards will be made prior to the grant start date of September 1st of this year. Staff requests permission to submit an application for this grant. Be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Nathan Weller.
Not a question. That's awesome. Absolutely. I don't say this. Absolutely awesome, Chief. Thank you so much for continuing to show us the way forward. So I absolutely 100%. I move to accept.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Is there any more discussion on this or any more questions? If not, this is a motion to authorize staff to apply for a 2021 Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act program grant. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Under new business tonight, we have not been notified of anyone online that wanted to do any new business. I don't see any new business from the council. Do I hear a motion then to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.